Greetings, everyone. I'm Greg Archer, and you're watching the Esalen interview where we connect with change agents, swim deep waters, and wander on the edge of it. Thank you for tuning in today. Joining us is Esalen faculty Ditas Katague. Ditas was slated to appear in a compelling Conversations on the Edge workshop earlier this summer at Esalen, but the pandemic shifted schedules, so that is being rescheduled. But we're happy to have her with us today to talk about the census and other things. Ditas is the former chair of the Census Bureau's National Advisory Committee and now the intrepid director of the California Complete Count Census 2020 office. And that's the outreach and communications campaign to ensure a complete count of the hardest to count Californians. Ditas was recognized in the Capital Weekly's top 100 most powerful movers and shakers in California politics. She also teaches Kundalini yoga after discovering it at Esalen in 2012, and we'll talk about that and so many other things. Ditas, welcome. It's so wonderful to connect with you today.
Great to be here, Greg. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Happy Tuesday. There's so much to talk about. I want to dive into the census and especially where California is at this point with that. But we are asking people, it's been an interesting last 5 months, last 6 months. So how has this time been for you in the last 4 to 6 months?
Well, I suppose like most people that are watching, it's been a roller coaster, sort of emotionally, physically. I've been lucky that right before shelter in place, so March, like the first week of March 1st through 6th, I was actually on the Esalen campus and I was getting certified for grief yoga. So teaching that. And I like to joke around that I got 2 massages while I was there. I think people can appreciate that. And I'm so glad because I haven't had any body work done this whole time that we've been sheltering in place and really trying to stay safe during the pandemic.
Right. What realizations have come up for you during this time? What do you feel this time is attempting to teach us? First with the pandemic and then with the racial injustice. I'm curious what thoughts have come to your mind about that?
So it's kind of this perfect storm. If you look at the pandemic, if you look at the current work that I've been doing, I was preparing for 3 years for really March 12th through July 31st. That was the time that the census enumeration was going to happen. And all of our work doing outreach to make sure that everybody got counted here in California was going to go live, so 2 years going to that. So the pandemic hits and then we can't do the stuff we need to do with census. And then of course with George Floyd and the whole sort of, I don't want to say racial awakening, but just definitely the spotlight on it. And in combining those three, for me, it becomes really about the fact that we should take a really hard look at our democracy, right? I mean, it's about that. All of this results from that, and the harm that's being done to people is because our democracy is it's a little bit in peril, I would say, and we're a pretty young and diverse, country. We're kind of this democratic experiment. Our, founding forefathers, they definitely wrote in the Constitution a plan that they had no idea what the complexion of our population would look like. So for me, democracy is just more, way more than just voting. So when we talk about democracy, we're really talking about all the ways that people influence and share decision-making power in society. So that really includes being counted in the census, it's voting, it's organizing and engaging in protests, it's making demands of our elected officials and more. But we have to do this, we have to engage, because regardless of sex, of religion, race, or any other facet of our individual identities, we need to demand from our leaders that what we need to survive and thrive. We must be able to participate in democratic processes on an equal basis, right? Because we pick our leaders, they represent us, we hold them accountable for our collective interests if they do things that are going to harm us. But if you're not involved, right? Like if you're not counted, if you don't vote, if you're not civically engaged, when a pandemic comes, right? when police violence ensues at a more alarming rate, we're not involved, or we don't have that power within the structure to push back and to systemically say, hey, this needs to stop, this needs to change. And we have seen that systemically the Black population and other people of color in the United States have been systematically excluded from democratic processes for centuries, and harm, injustice, and violence, has ensued. And I mean, if you look at what we faced in 2016, and if what you look in the news right now with what we're worried about in 2020, right? Like November 2020, I should say, is that the vote, like there's threats of the election being put off, there's voter suppression. So, I mean, I could go on and on about that, but this moment right now, for me, is a convergence. We're sitting from our home, but it gives us, there's not all that noise out there to really look at kind of the work I'm doing with civic engagement and to say, our democracy is at risk because the way it was designed has systemically put up barriers for all of us to be able to participate equitably. So that's a long way about later.
Beautiful, great answer. And yeah, folks, please leave some questions and comments in the feed, and I will get to them as gracefully as I can. Ditas, I was going to ask you what you feel is the biggest misconception about the census. Some people may say, I don't know, should I even bother filling out anything? So I'm curious how you would speak to that.
Well, so I think there's been a lot of sort of misinformation about it, even starting as early as last year. I mean, if you think about the census, it only happens once every 10 years. So, I mean, most people don't even remember filling it out. And last March, they started, the president, the Trump administration had said, let's put in a citizenship question, right? Like just threw that out there. And for those of you like with any bureaucratic process, and again, the decennial census is a federal operation. It is the most complex and largest federal operation that our federal government undertakes other than war, right? So it's the largest peacetime to count every single resident in this nation. It's huge. And so when you just think about, why would people not know about it, right? So that's why back in 1999, the state of California said, hey, you know what? The federal government doesn't do a really good job talking to Californians. We need to put aside some dollars and to do some outreach and education. And that's where I came in December 1999 and had 16 weeks to pull together a team and say, let's get the word out to make sure that people aren't confused about what it is, to make sure people know that it's safe and confidential. So the federal government, when they gather the data from you, and it's only 9 questions, they can't share it with anyone. They can't share it with any, enforcement, local, state, or federal, and your data is kept private for 72 years. So I think that's a big misconception, is like, why do they want all that information about me? And I know my daughter, some of her classmates, she's in high school now, said, why would I give any of that information to the government? And she looked at them and she said, you know what, you give more information when you fill out a quiz on BuzzFeed to figure out what, Harry Potter house you're in, right? So
exactly.
So it's that, it's really that fear of privacy, citizenship. That's kind of, I think, where people are confused. And then they don't understand why it's so important, right? Why do I need to be counted?
So it's very interesting. So where are we, or where is California at in this process? Because you've been streamlining all of that. And I know the pandemic must have shifted things a bit or a lot. So where are we?
A lot.
Yeah.
So what we found, like I said, this is my 3rd decennial census I've done this. We found that, and in 2000, when we took on this approach of civic engagement, to really use trusted messengers. I mean, this is back in 99. Everybody uses that now. But in 1999, we said, let's connect with trusted messengers in the community and let's get them to do the education and outreach, because you're going to listen to them. They're not going to listen to me, right? And then we said, let's put questionnaire assistance. Like, people need help filling it out. Where can we go? Maybe they don't speak the language. Let's put it in the right place, staffed by the right people. right? You don't want like federal worker type folks to be there. You want people from your community or, you know, in your clinic, you know, to, oh, I can, while I'm in the waiting room, I can fill this out. And then we added sort of a third piece, which was micro-targeted multilingual media, right? And this is back in 2000 when, you know, we didn't have Facebook, we didn't have all the social media. What happened was we just blitzkrieged the state with this. We outpaced the entire country in terms of response rates. And of course, we know how diverse and big California is. So 1 percentage point response rate in California, it's bigger than almost, you know, it's bigger than many states, you know, like Wyoming, Rhode Island, just 1% of California is bigger than that. So we've been preparing this time around using those same tenets of, you know, I'm not going to do the outreach, but we're going to take dollars and we're going to invest them into the community with community-based organizations. So my goal this time around was really to start to build a social movement infrastructure, not just for census, but for all civic engagement that needs to move forward. And so the governor and the legislature invested $187 million. It's a lot of money to go out to the community. To give you perspective, if you added up all other 49 other states and what they've invested, it wouldn't even come close. So, but upon that, how has COVID and the pandemic impacted our outreach? I'd say 2/3 of our work was going to be in person, engaging out in the community. And it's just, you know, with shelter in place, we couldn't do that right during March. We had lots of events. It's not safe. We want to, you know, for the safety of our partners. So they've really had to pivot, much as we're doing right now, and do things online. So you either go high tech or you go low tech, which lawn signs, right? Flyering, putting posters at food distribution sites. You know, so people, our partners have been incredibly creative, but it's still really tough because it's hard to reach some of those the populations that are most at risk.
So percentage-wise, is California doing well at this time? Typically, I mean, is California below where it needs to be, sort of right where it needs to be, above, and where does it stand like on the national average?
Yeah, so we're using a metric of comparing, and I think everybody in the nation is comparing where we were in 2010. But of course, it's not anything like 2010 because we've extended 12 additional weeks. But right now, California is at 64.7% of households have responded. That's 9.8 million households in California that has responded. And again, for perspective for people who aren't in California, if you added up Arizona, I mean, you've added up 12 other states, it wouldn't equal the 9.8 million households that have responded. But that also means that about 5.4 million California households have not yet to respond. And as we are closing out and the Census Bureau is moving into their next phase, self-response is still available. So you can answer online or over the phone, or if you've got a questionnaire in the mail, you can still answer. But at this point, if you haven't answered, there's someone is likely to knock on your door and try to basically enumerate you in person.
Got it. And it has that like actual door knock time. It's shortened, hasn't it? It was supposed to be like October 30th and now it's September 30th. Is that right?
Right. So back in April, when everything closed down, the Census Bureau, the career folks that have done this before said, you know, if the whole country is going to be closed down, we're going to need additional time to get all this work done. I mean, they plan this for a decade, right? And there's the data collection point, and then they got to go and they got to clean stuff up, right? And there's self-response, and then there's the door knocking. It's called non-response follow-up, and that's what we're heading into now. So when things changed, obviously in April and May, and that we couldn't send folks out, couldn't do outreach, they extended the time period, and they said, okay, we're going to extend the non-response follow-up, the door knocking, to end October 31st, under the understanding that the deadline to deliver the apportionment data to the president would need to be pushed out as well. And so they were operating under that Congress would act, because Congress would need to act to extend that deadline. Deadline's really 9 months from April 1st, which was Census Day. But if Census Day was June 1st, you know, obviously it would be pushed 2 months out.
Right.
In the last week or two, we've seen some pretty interesting motions, shall we say, by the Trump administration to shorten the time period of the count. So they're pushing to get everything squished down to basically 6 weeks. But if you just think about here in California, not even internationally, they have to reach 5.4 million households here in California in 6 weeks.
In 6 weeks.
A lot of work, right? And so all these questions, do they have enough people? Do they have enough time? And what happens? Well, they've said they're going to streamline things. And what does that mean? That means if you don't answer we'll just either ask your neighbor, or we'll use administrative records, or we'll just guess. So shortening it really has an impact on the potential of a really high undercount for all of California, really.
All of California. And so, the risk of unfair political representation is also key, on federal funding, and especially for the next decade. How do you see that playing? Like, what would be the best case scenario of that playing out?
So you mean the impact of if there were a huge undercount
Right.
of folks?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think an undercount of any community, it is going to be devastating, and that's because, like, fundamentally when you look at the census, what is it? It's about two things. It's about power, and it's about money, right? And the power is all about apportionment. It's about how we choose our representatives. How many representatives we get out of the 435 congressional seats. It's about how many votes we get in the electoral college. It's also, the data is used by state legislators to figure out how they draw the lines locally, all the way down to city council seats and school board seats. So that's the power piece, but the money piece is even more, right? If people are not counted, then the dollars don't come back to their community, and that just compounds the social injustices and just the economic barriers. So when you think about dollars, every April or every spring, there's like an electronic sucking sound, right? From your bank account to the federal treasury when you pay taxes. And so what I tell people is, like, every spring you do that, but where does it go, right? And only once a decade, when you participate and are counted in the census, that's your opportunity to demand that those dollars come back into your community. So again, the census is about power, it's about money, and then finally, it's about data. If Trader Joe's doesn't know that there's enough people there to sustain a store, they're not going to put the store there. Or if a big company wants to build a facility, they use that data to figure that out. And nonprofits and philanthropy, they use census data to figure out, where do we invest? And also, if you think about it during a pandemic, will there be enough hospital beds, right? If you aren't counted. Exactly. Schools. Yeah, my daughter, she had to sit on the floor of her math class because there weren't enough seats.
Wow, really?
Mm-hmm. Public school.
Public school.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people in one room.
Yeah, like 42 kids.
Yeah, a lot of people in one room. Wow. So can you talk about the average day of a census worker, somebody who actually does go door to door? I'm curious, you say there's 6 weeks to count 5.4 million people, right? So what does their average day look like?
So, and I can only do this because I don't work for the U.S. Census Bureau, but I did, when I was chair of the National Advisory Committee, I was Title 13 sworn, so you have to be sworn. That's about your privacy. And I walked during the 2018 test. And of course, over the decade, they test their processes. So I walked along with an enumerator. He had his handheld device, which he opened up. It populated with the households he was supposed to knock on and go visit. And we walked around and we knocked on doors and I'd say 80% didn't answer that first time. It is hard work. So I just want to make sure people are nice to the enumerators, because it's really hard work out there. But even more so, they'll leave a note on your door with your 16-digit PIN. And you don't need the PIN. If you have the PIN, it's much easier. But if you get a note on your door, I'm just encouraging everyone to just take it. You don't have to answer the door and be, exposed because you don't want to be around people. You can safely just answer online. right? It has the directions there. So why wouldn't people just do that? And if you don't have broadband access, you can call the 800 number as well, and we can provide those. But it's just a day in the life of a enumerator. It's really hard work. Easier when you deal with single family homes and people are homeowners. Easier because, you know, they can be also, there's administrative records on those. The harder part is when you go and you walk up to, in Rhode Island, 3 stories, right? It was a 3-story walk up. And we had to walk up each, but sometimes it's you know, they're not even numbered, right? So these households, there's multiple households living there. So it's a tough job for enumerators. And so my job and my team's job is to let everybody know in every way we can, whether it's flyering or putting stuff when people are at the grocery store on their windshield, to say, just go online and be answered. Because if they don't, people definitely will be missed. And then the Census Bureau just has to use data to kind of guess. And when they guess, it's called imputing. They miss a lot of people.
Right. And those most at risk of being not counted include minorities, immigrants, residents in hard to reach or remote areas, renters, which is interesting, renters, and children ages 5 and under, right?
Yeah, children 0 to 5 have been historically undercounted in the last 2 decades. They've done a lot of research. I help with that to figure out why is that. And they haven't really nailed it down. They said it can be confusion, like, oh, I didn't know. I thought I was only supposed to count the adults. It can be concealment of perhaps that child is living with maybe a grandparent, right? Because maybe the parents are gone. And so they're like, oh, I'm in a senior living. I'm not supposed to have the kid here. So what we did in terms of not really being able to nail down is we partnered with First 5, Head Start, the Women, Infants, and Children's Program. And we basically invested in them and had them go out to their partners to do that type of education to get kids counted. They created books, you know, for kids to read, toys. And if you're a sort of low income mom, you're going to take that toy. And if it's census branded, then you're going to be like, okay, I'll take the 5 minutes to listen to this person that's going to give me the toy for my child, right? Because I'm poor. And so that's the type of education we've been trying to do.
That's remarkable. It's remarkable. And I find it's interesting because it's not that uber time extensive to go through the process of filling out the form or answering the questions, right?
Yeah, it takes literally like 10 minutes.
Right.
If that. It's only 9 questions, right? They don't ask anything about your finances or any of that. It's just really basic: your name, age, sex, race, whether you rent or own. The longer question, that's now done on sampling, and that goes on during the decade. But I wanted to point one thing out to you, Greg, that, you know, as we look at response rates for the hardest to count Californians, that's been really our focus. What we found, this amazing trend, not amazing, I should say, surprising trend, when I look at the data, because I'm very data oriented, I look at the map, that there are areas, and I'll just say it, that are, I mean, I could say they're more comfortable, but they're just more affluent, that if you compare where they were in 2010, they're way behind. So if you look at areas of San Francisco, the Marina, Cow Hollow, Presidio, Pacific Heights, there are areas that are 20 percentage points behind where they were, same area.
Wow.
10. Closer to yeah, Carmel by the Sea is behind. Newport Beach, if you look down in Los Angeles, Beverly Hills, Malibu, these are areas that people might be less impacted by the pandemic, that might be home and probably have good broadband access.
Mm-hmm.
It's a new trend. We just are looking at it and we're like, okay, well, we got to figure out how do we reach them. So, you know, I appreciate coming on here. I'm hoping that any of your viewers, listeners will be like, oh, wait, I didn't answer, or I should tell my aunt that's, you know, kicking back and not involved, and she's just doing her own thing during the pandemic, to make sure that she goes online.
Right.
To be counted.
Yeah, California contingent, if you're tuning in, especially Carmel by the Sea, which is not too far from Esalen, fill out those questions, answer those questions. That's very interesting. Do you feel that 20% figure is pandemic related in some way, or is it just, does it seem like this whole year is a little off anyway, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and it's happening nationally too. So there was an article in the New York Times that called it the Manhattan effect, that, well, maybe these affluent areas, they have, people who live in the marina, maybe they're staying with their parents up in Marin or what have you, right? Maybe they have a second residence that they're staying there. So that's one of the things, but they will get a door knock. And then they'll use, the Census Bureau will try to use administrative records to count them. That being said, since they were counted in 2010, they probably might have good records, better records than, say, a massive 600 unit, apartment building, full of renters in more of a diverse, area that maybe has that where they don't speak, English isn't their first language. That makes them to count.
Right. Wow, it's such amazing information, and I love your mind because it's I can see the data swimming around in there. It's so wonderful how eloquently you express all these facts and figures. It's really great. I'm very intrigued by your backstory, and maybe we can talk about your journey a little bit. You grew up in Kansas City, which I feel is the best place to be for Christmas. Those horse-drawn carriages and
yes,
yeah, just it's brilliant there at Christmas. But you grew up in Kansas City. You relocated to Modesto, California, and from my understanding, a significant event happened to your father's friend, and that greatly shaped your view of the federal government. And so I'm wondering if you can elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, and at the time I was maybe, I don't know, 9 or 10. And I just remember, that a neighbor, like the ambulance came and they took the father of my, my friend off in an ambulance, and off they went. And, you always wonder, oh, well, what happened? Well, you get taken to an ambulance. They take you to the closest emergency room for whatever's going on with you. But we were in a sort of a newly built subdivision, and so the nearest emergency room was much farther away than it probably should have been, right? And so you think about, if that emergency room were 10 minutes closer, would he have suffered less damage? And so you think about that, like, well, wow, how do they determine that? Well, you know what, they determine it by when you're counted, like the Office of Statewide Health Planning, and you how many clinics need to be there. So I think, not that I didn't realize it at the time, but as you kind of look back at it, you're saying, oh, no one ever, how did they figure out traffic? How do people take so much for granted of what government does, whether it's local or state? And then who handles the data? Where do they get the data to figure out where they're going to put the next hospital? Will it be closer so your loved one will get the care they need quicker?
So that event really impacted you. How old were you at the time?
I was about 10, probably.
You were about 10. And so when did it hit you that you wanted to, like, I want to get involved in government, or I want to be a change agent in some field to make a difference? Because it's a very interesting thing to witness at 10, and then also not only witness it, but then to, integrate it and go, oh, I want to do something that makes a difference.
Gosh, I think being a public servant and always understanding the impact, and always wondering, it really is, people go with their everyday lives and they don't, people say, oh, I don't need politics, I don't need law. Like, that's why you have stop signs, right? That's how you get a stop sign, because somebody got run over there so many times. And that's how you interact with the space that we live in. It's by engaging in democracy and understanding those systems, right? So from a really real thing of, is there a crosswalk that's safe, right? Well, how does that work? So I guess just understanding, and through high school, being involved in student government there, all the way through when I went to Berkeley and I was involved in student government there as well. I have to confess, I was a double major in art, practice of art, and political communications. And so it always seemed to be, how do these structures that we have, political structures or civic, structures that are set up, how do they serve the public? Why are they there? And who's telling them that they're doing a bad job or a good job? And how can we improve them, right? So I ran off after I worked in the private sector for a little bit, and it just wasn't very fulfilling. I felt very disconnected from that kind of wonderment of how do we improve our people's everyday lives. And so I ended up going to graduate school. I will say my older brother wanted me to go to law school, but I didn't. I ended up going to get my master's in public administration and public policy at USC. And funnily enough, I ended up doing a focus on intergovernmental management. So state, local level was in Los Angeles. And then I moved up to Sacramento, did state level, and then went to DC for my last semester and did, so it was local, state, and federal. And frankly, I'll tell you, I just did it because I wanted to live in those three places and have an excuse. But, you know, lo and behold, my work, Census, is really about the intersection and coordination of local, state, and federal governments in working together to provide services, good or bad or otherwise. They always need to be improved.
I love that. And I also love the painting behind you. You said you art, and that is your painting, folks. Ditas created that. That's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. The color is amazing. Can you speak more about being a Filipino American and how that shaped you personally and politically?
You know, I think that as a woman of color, I mean, to be honest, it took a long time for me to be really comfortable in my skin. You know, I'm first generation born here in Kansas City. My dad came over to finish his PhD, right, and stayed. And I don't know if I mentioned that my mother passed away yesterday. And so I was with that. Yeah, so I'm a little because I'm thinking about her. But, you know, when you ask me that, it's, I think about, well, people say, how come you don't speak Tagalog, right? Which is the native tongue of Filipinos. And I was born in 1965. I grew up in, you know, partially in Kansas City where, you know, my parents didn't want me to have an accent, right? They were the only, you know, family of color in that neighborhood. And so, but when I think about just, you know, was, you know, with my mother and my dad, and I just said, you know, thank you for taking a chance. Can you imagine leaving your home country for a better life, right? To pursue education and to stay here because you want your children to grow up and have more opportunities. And I'm a little verklempt, but I just, you know, thank both my parents for taking that. How uncomfortable would that be to go somewhere where you don't know anyone? And so I always, like, when I see like foreign exchange students, I'm like, hey, come to dinner. You know, I just always want to open my doors and being welcoming because so many people did that for my father and for my parents. But as a woman of color, you know, not speaking the language, I've had to sort of navigate what does that mean to be Filipino. And then I also see it in my daughter. She's 17 and she's half Italian, half Filipino American. And she struggles with her identity as well. And I think what's going around right now with us, that there is such a focus on race and identity, I think it's good. I think it's because now people are able to talk about it, right? They're able to talk about, and I love that Esalen is taking on the anti-racism and that sort of education about bias. I think it's making it more, hopefully, comfortable, or I should say less uncomfortable for people to talk about race. I think as a Filipino woman of color in sort of a leadership position, I can speak to both, translate a little bit in terms of what it's like to be an immigrant, what it's like to not be involved democratically in our process. My cousin saw me on Channel 3 News at 11 o'clock at night. She texts me and she says, I filled it out. I said, good. She's like, I was kind of scared because I'm paranoid. I didn't want to give my information on the census form. And I'm thinking, okay, it's been like 4 months of, you know, the count and you still haven't filled it out. But I was like, thank you for filling it out. And she actually asked me, why is it important? She didn't know, even though I've been doing this work for, 20 years. And so it brings me back to, even though I'm living this civic engagement, be involved. Of course I'd be involved. There's so many people out there that are like, that see no reason to be involved, that are afraid of government, that don't want to deal with the politics. But that's where real change happens when you engage in the process. And so, it's really my passionate goal to encourage people to engage more. And I have so much faith in the youth of our country that I'm going to step back from this engagement, but I'm going to be right behind the young people in their like teens and 20s and say, go, it's your time to lead and be involved. And you know what, that's what we're seeing with these protests. That's what we're seeing with the civic engagement, is that this new generation is like, yeah, I'm not putting up with this stuff anymore. And I think as an older sort of activist, change agent, I'm here to support them, tell them, watch out for that pitfall, but you go. So anyways, I don't know. I kind of went off on a tangent there, but.
No, you didn't. And thank you for, the way that you presented that. And it's very informative and very beautiful. And remind us of your mother's name, so we can all know and hold some space for her and your family.
Yes, my mom's name is Katague.
Katague.
Yes, Katague. And yep, she's making her way up to heaven right now. And I don't know if I mentioned I'm a widow, so I said, go look for Nick up there and say hi. So, yeah. I learned when I was in Esalen just this March, taking that grief yoga class with Paul Deniston and David Kessler. I learned that it's about learning to love in their absence. And that's part of the grief journey. So it was really powerful to be there.
Yeah, and I think, and to be there and to be among them, I mean, they're really amazing at what they do and how much space they hold and the information that they can share. Well, we are thinking about you and your family, and I think it's wonderful that you came on today, a day after. So what do you love most about what you do?
I did the census because it was the closest thing I could come to a political campaign without being political. Because I don't like partisanship. I don't like politics. And census is supposed to be for everyone. And that's what I loved about it, is that I'm passionate about it. And it's hard not to be once you understand what's at stake, not to be passionate about it. But this time around, we're finding that some people don't think everybody should be counted. So that's been a little bit challenging. But that's what I love about it, is just making people understand how important it is, and that every single person counts, and that they don't need to be invisible.
They don't need to be invisible. That's right. You also teach Kundalini yoga, and you discovered that back at Esalen in 2012, which seems like another world away. 2012. Right? So how has Kundalini yoga impacted your life?
The funny thing is, that was the year my husband passed, and I was like, I need to go to, my daughter went to camp that week, and so I signed up for Kia Miller. I love Kia and Tommy. For what I thought was a vinyasa flow. I thought it was a vinyasa flow retreat because that was what I was practicing at the time. And I get here and I'm like, whoa, this is some weird stuff, right? But so powerful. The breath work, we focused on the heart. I remember on Wednesday, and I walked out, and it might've been just because I was at Esalen as well. And I looked up and the sky was crystal clear and thousands of stars. And I always go in August, and so that meteor shower, comes while you're sitting in the baths. Anyways, it was just transformative for me. It opened my heart up. My husband was sick for so long that being able to open up and breathe, which your typical sort of vinyasa yoga doesn't really answer to that. And so we worked on the chakras, and what I became certified in 2015. I've been teaching, but I've now really started to migrate toward trauma-informed yoga, and also grief yoga. So with my sort of, community of widows and people who have lost. But what I find that, people think, oh, that's some weird, yoga, is that all of the stuff that Kundalini does and many other types of breath work, it works on, we call it chakras. It's actually your nerve ganglia, right? So I'm moving to do more understanding polyvagal theory. And basically the vagus nerve, it's the longest nerve. It goes all the way down your body. And when you can activate that nerve and release it, it releases stress, it releases all kinds of hormones. And the best way to do it for me and for my daughter sings, but chanting breath work, humming, anytime that you do that type of work and breath work, it opens up that nervous system. So that's really the work that I'm focusing on now, is when I look at, again, tying it back to Black Lives Matter, tying it back to the pandemic, we are all grieving the loss of our lives, right? So how do I incorporate some of the grief yoga practices in what I teach? But also my dear, friends I have so many African-American male friends, big guys, professional, that I just love and adore. And I get so emotional when I think every day they go out scared that they're going to get pulled over, right? That is so very real. And it hurts my heart. And I think, well, no wonder some of their health outcomes can be poorer than others, because every day their body is in the stress. And so for me, being able to share that breath work, being able to share a safe space for them to breathe and release, it's so fundamentally important to me. And it helps me with my healing as well.
That is so beautiful. And I love that you had such amazing teachers, Kia Miller, David Kessler, Paul Dennison, and just brilliant people in their field.
I will say my Kundalini teacher, she's 82 years old, and it's Krishna Kaur. She's one of the few African-American old school Kundalini teachers, and she lives down in Los Angeles. You guys should go check her out. She's amazing, amazing as well. Kia, and with everybody, I've been super lucky.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Lisa says, so sorry to hear about your mother. Michelle says, holding you in light. Gil says, condolences. And other people have been chatting and commenting too. So it's nice to have people tuning in and listening to us and giving you great energy too. Well, I have a few more questions for you before we wrap up. It's so engaging to talk to you. On so many levels, on what you do with civic engagement and as a change agent, and your yoga, and just in general. I feel like I could discuss things with you for hours in a coffee house. So instead I have decaf, and we go that way for now until we can all be together. But what brings you a real sense of wonder and awe?
I think a couple things. It has to do with both that nervous system and understanding the keys to managing everything that we're feeling. But I have to tie it to my 17-year-old daughter. Mm-hmm. She suffers really from anxiety. It's been really magnified with the pandemic. She, to me, is just amazing. She, watched her dad die when she was 8. And she's fought an uphill battle with, the social school and just the drama of growing up as a teen. As a parent, you just want to take away all that angst because remember how bad high school was. She, last year, through a friend, heard about a school called the United World Colleges, which is an international baccalaureate program. So it really is finishing high school. It's not college. They have 18 campuses around the world. And she applied. She applied for scholarships, on her own, and she made the finalists. She didn't get the bigger scholarship, where if you get that, they tell you where to go. But they came back and they said, we still want you to represent the U.S. And so they're sending her to the Netherlands. And out of those campuses, many of the schools that the kids that got the bigger scholarship, they're not going because it's closed. So she leaves in 12 days. So I'll be,
oh my gosh.
Yeah, empty nest. So I'm just in wonderment about how to evolve, after spending, nearly 20 years taking care of everybody else. It's time for me to continue my process. It's time for me, as we say in widowhoodness, for a chapter 2, right? It's just kind of scary to say, but I think that's what I've learned about myself during this time period, is that I'm ready to make space to share. I mean, I delved into my work, my daughter, my yoga, my art, and I didn't make space for my heart, and I didn't make space to be open to true joy. So scary to say, yeah, I think I'm ready for that. But, you know, love in the time of COVID, right? I don't even know where to begin. But I think it's making space in your head and your heart and physical space, that hopefully it'll happen and it'll come along my way.
Right, right. A glorious chapter 2. I was going to ask you what you've been learning about yourself lately, but you answered all that in that as well. I'm curious. One last question for you. How has your path, your work, helped you expand your own human potential?
Well, I feel like, particularly those last 20 years, like everything has been about learning and giving forward. So when I learn about yoga, I want to share it, right? Even though I did the teacher training for me and I didn't want to be a teacher, so I'm just doing it because I want to learn more, I want to explore more, I want to heal. But then you learn it and you're transformed, and then you have to teach. My teachers are like, you have to teach. Kia's like, are you teaching yet? Every time I would see her every August, are you teaching yet? And so I feel like I'm just a channel of, I take things in for my healing, but then I have to share them. I belong now. I have crystal bowls. I'm certified in sound therapy, and I wanted to have people. I set up an area here. I wanted to bring people in for their nervous system to do that. So hopefully, we can do it outside or something. But everything I learn, whether it's painting or sharing or making jewelry. So I make these malas so that they can help you, with your mantras. All that's an expression, but it's all done for me first, for my healing. And then I want to share it with everybody. So I don't know if that answers your question on that, but.
Oh, absolutely. It does. Yeah. I like how that it's your own inspiration first, and then you share it out. You draw into it and you share it out. I love that. I can relate on some level to writing. I love to write, and sharing all that is really important to me. So, Ditas, it's such a pleasure to connect with you, and so informative. So folks, if you are from California and you are tuning in and you have not filled out those questions for the census, this is the time to do it. And it's relatively easily, 10 minutes, not much more than that. And Ditas, thank you again for everything. We will keep you in our thoughts this week with your mom. And it's been a very informative conversation. So folks, keep in touch with us on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, Pinterest. Learn more about us and what's going on at Esalen in the coming months at esalen.org/learn. We also have plenty of blogs there. You can dive in, stories that will connect you to others. Ditas, thank you again for being here, and it's such a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Greg, and just ditch the door knock. Everybody be counted. It'll be all good.
That's right. All right, folks, until next time, I'm Greg Archer, and this is the Esalen Interview, and we will see you very soon. Stay safe, stay well.